Well, good morning, AWBD. As Barry told you, I've been a financial advisor. Well, he didn't tell you this, but I have been a financial advisor to municipal utilities districts since 1983, and the guy I started with is right down there in that red shirt. I haven't seen him in a long time. And I'm here today to talk to you about MUD financing and how it's different in the state of Texas and how it's different than any other place in the United States. And to talk to you about how we're different, I need to talk to you about regulation and oversight. And to talk to you about that, I'm going to take you back to the 1980s. Not the cool clothes we wore and all the great music, but something else going on in Houston at the time, and that was an oil boom. And there was a general philosophy in building communities that if you build it and finance it, they will come. And you know what happened? They stopped coming. We had an oil bust in Texas. Construction plans were thrown in the trash. Residential subdivisions looked like ghost towns. Retail centers were left unfinished and empty. Tax rates went through the roof. I'm going to give you a really good example of one of the 1980s projects. Is anybody in here from Big Oaks Mud? Yay, there they are. Well, Big Oaks Mud now is a big, strong, well-respected credit. But in the 1980s, it was a different story. And Big Oaks, like a lot of MUDs, had sold a whole bunch of debt based upon a whole bunch of value they hoped would come. The oil bust happened. Values didn't come, they plummeted. The tax rate of Big Oaks Mud in the 1980s went over $30 per 100. So think about your own MUDs, whether you're paying 50 cents or $1.50. Think about 30. The tax bill in some situations was more than what the house was worth. It was a mess in Houston, Texas, and a lot of elected officials were looking at this mess with the idea of just shut this down. No more MUDs, we've got to stop this. Look at all these people that are in trouble. But instead, those elected officials and business people got together and they came up with a set of rules that would prevent districts from over-leveraging in the future. So what's leveraging? Leveraging is debt. And these rules were going to be administered by the Texas Water Commission, which is what we now call the TCEQ. Very important for you to know. These rules back in the 1980s were put in place primarily to protect property owners from bad finance. Bad finance that led to crazy tax rates, loss of property, and bankruptcy in some situations. The biggest change from the 1980s to now in the way that we do business has to do with the way the developer is treated. And in the 1980s, we did something called upfront finance, and it's still done this way in a lot of states like California, Florida, Colorado. And a developer could go find 500 acres, create a MUD on that 500 acres. That MUD would sell bonds, give the money to the developer with the hope that the developer would put the infrastructure in the ground and start to build houses. Well, it worked real well when it worked real well. But when it didn't work, it was a catastrophe. So what we do now is something called takeout finance. And all of us in this business, I see lawyers and bankers, and we're very proud of our takeout finance. So now the developer's got to go find his own money. He can get a loan, he can get equity financing, he can pull it out of his back pocket. But he's got to find the money, put his own money in the ground, start building houses and multifamily, whatever it might be, and then a district can request permission to sell bonds from the TCEQ. The burden was shifted to the developer. Sorry, I'm just going to have to look at these notes. Didn't think I'd have to. Also on the developer, he or she, I should use she, can only be reimbursed if a district, 100% of the facilities, if a district can operate under two different scenarios. One, a district keeps a reasonable debt ratio. We call it the 10-to-1 rule. If a district has $100 million in debt, then they can only have $100 million in value, they can only have $10 million in debt. The other way a district can pay the developer 100% is if the district can get a rating from Moody's Investor Service or Standard & Poor's. A rating by its nature means that a district has gained strength, maturity, and independence from its developer. If a district can't operate like this, then a developer can only get 70% of what he's put in the ground and can't ever come back for the other 30%. And the phrase I want all of you to take away from this discussion on how the developer is treated is skin in the game. What these rules did and the change from the 80s forced the developer to have skin in the game, and it's really important to the way we do business here. Now, there are dozens and dozens of feasibility rules that we as financial advisors have to look at anytime one of your districts sells bonds. There's too many of them for me to go over right now. I'm going to hit a few key areas. One of them is tax rate. These rules of the TCEQ go to extremes to make sure the tax rate is reasonable. So there are tax rate limits, and they vary from county to county. If you're in Montgomery, Fort Bend, Harris counties, it's $1.50. If you're in Travis or Denton counties, it's $1.20. It's $1 in some rural counties. So everything we look at has to fit within this tax rate test. How do you operate? How much does it take to operate? Do you have a levy improvement district on top of you? Is there a master district? So all of these rules are there to make sure the tax burden is reasonable. The rules also make us go back to the 80s, and they make us assume in some of the calculations that the developer's gone, bankrupt, whatever. All the home builders have pulled out, but you sold the debt. How bad does the tax rate get? So we have to prove up that it doesn't go over 250 in those instances. These tax tests, like I said, have to take into account everything that you do, not just the debt. The other part of the rules that I want to bring up has to do with facilities integrity. And these rules put a quality standard on what you construct. If you're going to finance it with bonds, you're going to construct it the right way. You're also going to publicly bid. A developer can't ask one of his buddies to come in and build the utilities. The rules also require you to have adequate facilities. If you've got a bond issue and you're financing 100 lots in that bond issue, you have to have water supply and wastewater treatment on the ground for 100 lots. You can't just have 50 and tell the TCEQ you'll get around to the other 50 at another time. So incredible standards on the facilities. All of these rules, whether they relate to the developer or the tax or the facilities, are an example. MUDs have oversight and standards no other issue in the state of Texas has. No city, no county, no school. No other issuer has a state agency looking over their shoulder at every step for no other purpose than to make sure that the property owners are protected. Now, I'm standing up here talking to you about a lot of government and a lot of regulation in a time when this country has said they want less government and less regulation. Drain the swamp. So, oh no. So what have we gotten for all of our government and regulation that we deal with in this water district business? We have gotten one of the most amazing public-private partnerships you will ever see. You've got governmental agencies, political subdivisions, private companies, all working together to produce a quality product. You've gotten consumer protection. Who's the consumer? First and foremost, the homeowner, the property owner. And don't forget the bondholders, the little old ladies in the institutions that are investing in all of your bonds. We've gotten an enormous amount of quality finance an enormous amount of investment grade rated debt. That means districts with ratings from Moody's Investor Service or Standard & Poor's. I got the expert right here. I don't know the percentage, Ron, but I would bet it's 90 to 95% of all MUDs have a rating. A rating directly correlates to lower interest cost. Lower interest costs directly relate to lower tax rates. Special districts in California, Florida, and Colorado, they have no regulation and oversight. They sell what we call in our business junk bonds, and their borrowing costs in those states are considerably higher than what we pay in the state of Texas. Now I'm going to have a quick discussion about taxation, and as you know, your bonds are secured by an unlimited tax pledge. That's a super scary term, isn't it? Unlimited tax. And that means you can go as high as you need to pay your debt. Think of Big Oaks MUD. But the truth is, those rules that are in place, they limit the amount of debt that any district can have. They make sure that no district pushes the envelope on that unlimited pledge. And if you are not aware of how a district starts and all the planning that goes into it, when you have a new district and there's nothing out there, you usually have a bunch of consultants that get together to try to come up with the tax rate. What do we start with in this district? The TCEQ says $1.50 is as high as you can go. So you'll have a lot of people sitting around the table looking at all the infrastructure that needs to be financed, looking at all the value that's going to come in the ground over the years. And we try to come up with a tax rate that, one, is within the TCEQ rules, but a tax rate that we reasonably expect to go down over the life of this project. We never start a project at $1 in year one with a plan of going to $1.15 in year 3 and on up. That would be pure chaos in a community. This high to low planning has worked beautifully. And you all have a handout in what you've been given that shows that over the years, the average tax rates in MUDs have decreased dramatically. Tax rates go down for a lot of reasons. Estimates in construction become real. Water and sewer revenue kick in. And because we have such quality development in MUDs, the house values start to go up. And that's really never something that's used in the initial planning. So please look at that handout. Okay, now we're going to talk about something that's been very sensitive lately. It's been in the paper, been a lot of chatter in MUD meetings, been some big public meetings just to discuss it. That's the cost of MUD financing. And I'm not talking about interest, I'm talking about the fees, all the stuff you pay to get a bond issue done. So are MUD financing costs higher than a city, school, or county? Yes, they are. Why are they? We are the grassroots issuers in the United States, the smallest issuers. We sell bonds between $1 million and $6 million. If you are an issuer like a city, county, or school and you're selling $50 million, $100 million, $200 million, you've got some pretty big economies of scale. If you're a water district selling $50 million, you ought to have some economies of scale. That would be very rare for a water district, although it has happened. There is a cost to this fabulous regulation I've been talking to you about. There's fees associated with it. There's a bond application. And if you all have not laid eyes on one of your own district's bond applications, please do. It is a massive piece of work. And a lot of times just the summaries get to the meeting, but take a look at that bond application, and there are fees associated with that. Most districts don't have a finance director or a finance staff or an in-house counsel. You don't have a whole office of people that you're paying benefits and salaries to. Your consultants fill that role. You don't have staff. The cost of issuance of MUDs reflects all of this, and it is different than a big issuer, but really not that much, but it is a little bit higher. Now, some of this is going to be redundant to what's previously been said today, and are there alternatives to the way we develop communities with MUDs? You bet there's an alternative, and to really think about that alternative, put your developer hat on. Let's go back to that 500 acres. You've just bought 500 acres and you want to develop a beautiful community with a great entryway and a great rec center, maybe some green paths. First thing you've got to do is sit down and figure out how you're going to do this and show a profit to the bottom line. Developers are for-profit entities. They are not charitable institutions. So the developer can do it the way we do it in MUDs and finance all the infrastructure through MUD bonds. Municipal bonds produce the lowest borrowing cost of anything in the United States. Lower than mortgages, lower than corporate, lower than treasuries. And as you know, the debt service is paid with taxes. A tax spread over the whole community, over the multifamily, over the HEB, over the raw land the developer still owns, and over the houses. One uniform tax that everybody is paying. You buy your house, you move in, you start paying your MUD tax. You sell your house in 5 years, the next guy moves in, and he's going to start paying his MUD tax. Everybody's paying a share over the life of this district. Now, yes, that last guy that moves into the house is probably paying a lower tax than the first guy, because I told you tax rates do go down. But that's how we do it in MUD finance. The other option would be for this developer, and Steve hit on this a little bit, to say, you know, I'm not going to do a MUD. I don't want all that regulation and oversight, and I'd kind of like my buddy Bill here to be able to get that contract for the lots. So I'm just going to build all the infrastructure into the cost of the lot. So what has that done immediately? It's pushed up the cost of housing. And that developer is saying in that situation, you homeowner, you go finance it. You finance, I'm going to say $50,000. It goes up at least. Kelly's nodding her head at me. That's probably right. It's immediately pushed up the cost of housing. You got to borrow the money at your mortgage rate, which is definitely going to be higher than municipal bond rates. When you sell your house in 5 years, you got to make sure you recoup that extra $50,000. So it's just a different methodology. MUD financing, as Steve said, is one of the primary reasons that the cost of living in the Houston area and other parts of the state is lower than areas that don't use it. I got 1 minute. I heard a developer recently say that developer reimbursement through MUD financing can be directly correlated to quality community development at higher levels of amenities. Through MUD finance, more money is put into your communities. Okay, I gotta hurry. Why can't the cities do it all? This has been in the paper also. The cities, most of you all are in the ETJ, not in a city's boundaries. The city has an obligation to the people that live in its boundaries. They cannot take the burden and risk of a new community and put it on the people that live in the boundaries. And like Steve said, if we waited on the cities to do all this, you wouldn't have Cinco Ranch, you wouldn't have Fairfield. None of that would exist. Thank you very much. I could stand up here and talk about this, but what we do in Texas with municipal finance is an example for the whole country. It is spectacular, and it protects all of you. Thank you.